I'm now going to turn it back over to Jill to introduce our next speakers. Is that right? So that now we'll hear about policy, start here, potential policy.
Yes, thank you so much, Jane. Hi again, everybody. Just as a reminder, I'm Jill Hoffman. I'm the Executive Director for the White River Alliance. This session, we're going to move into some conversations on sustainable water use, which is a primary objective of ours at the Alliance, is to continue these conversations and then push them into policy discussions. So in this session, we're going to have an opportunity to learn about what's happening in one of our neighboring states, Ohio, as well as hear a little bit about a proposed bill brought by Representative Mike Aylesworth about this topic as well. So I'd like to just introduce our first speaker to you, Brad Lodge. Brad is the program manager for Ohio's Water Inventory and Planning Program, and he works at the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. Brad's been a program manager in his role for just about 2.5 years with the Ohio DNR. And he has graduated with an environmental geography and watershed management from the University of Arizona. So he heirs from a dry climate with his education and is now managing water here in the Midwest. So he's going to describe for us Ohio's Water Inventory and Planning Program. Brad, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your experience in Ohio. I'll let you just go ahead and get started.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jill. Jane, if you want to turn over control.
You should have it.
Oh, there we go. Thank you, Jane. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Brad Lodge. I'm the Water Inventory and Planning Program Manager here at ODNR Division of Water Resources. We are the regulatory division for all things water quantity. I was asked to give a presentation today on Ohio's water permitting program, a high-capacity water permitting program. So I'll talk a little bit about a program overview, go into the 2 permits that we do have, and then wrap it up with the changes we made to both of the permits regarding groundwater in 2019. So the goal of the program is to ensure safe and reliable drinking water for all of Ohio's citizens while still maintaining activities such as recreation, future economic growth, as well as for wildlife and biology purposes. We are responsible for implementing and enforcing Ohio's rules, regulations, and contracts related to water supply and water resource development. Within the program, we house the Water Withdrawal Facility Registration Program, which is similar to what Ryan and Mark were talking about. Any facility with the capacity to withdraw over 100,000 gallons per day must register with the program and report annually. This is not a permit. This is just a registration. No money is involved. It just allows us to track water movement throughout the state. We also maintain compliance with the Great Lakes Compact. Every year we use the data collected from the water withdrawal program to turn over to the Great Lakes Commission to show what water was used, consumed, and diverted in and out of the Great Lakes Basin. We just revamped our water conservation education and outreach. I want to give a little shameless plug here. We rolled out our State of Ohio Water Withdrawal Atlas, which is a great tool for conservation. I'll put some links in the chat for Jane to hand out. It breaks down our water use by county and Huck 8 watershed, so you can go pull any county or Huck 8 watershed and see a detailed page of the water use for those areas, whether it's groundwater, surface water, what water is being used, and then the trends dating back all the way to the beginning of the program in 1990. So I urge everybody to check that out. We also manage the water supply contracts in Ohio, specifically our upground reservoirs. Ohio owns quite a bit of water around the state within these reservoirs, and we administer the contracts selling that water to public water supply around the state. And lastly, we have the high capacity water use permitting, which I'm here to talk to you about today. So we'll start with our consumptive use permit, which is statewide. This has been required in Ohio Revised Code Chapter 1501 since the late 1980s. It has now moved to 1521. This requirement, any facility in Ohio that withdraws water in the amount that would result in a new or increased consumptive use of more than an average of 2 million gallons per day in a 30-day period. So 60 million gallons a month roughly would require a permit, and this permit would need to be permitted before the consumptive use occurs. Existing permits, we've only had 4 applications in the last 30 plus years. All 4 have been within the last 5 years. 3 out of the 4 of them have been permitted, and all of them were for surface water withdrawals along the Ohio River. There were two permits for the same company. They couldn't figure out the schematic of their factory, so they relinquished 1 permit. And then we have another permit for a hydrofracking facility. So what is consumptive use? I know not every state uses the same definition. It is a portion of water that is not returned but evaporated, incorporated into a product or other processes. So you can see this chart of our consumptive use coefficients that many of the Great Lakes use. I'm pretty sure it's been adopted by many of the Great Lakes states. As you can see, you could start with quarry dewatering, which is considered 0% consumed, and that goes all the way up to hydraulic fracturing, which is considered 100% consumed. So let's say a fracking company comes to Ohio and they want 2 million gallons per day withdrawal. Since they are considered 100% consumed, they would be 2 million gallons of consumptive use, and that would require a permit. And that applies to all these coefficients here. Some determinations of approval, what the chief considers when she's going to approve or deny a permit. It will not be approved if navigable waters will be adversely impacted. The consumptive use does not incorporate maximum feasible conservation practices. It does not reasonably promote the protection of public health, safety, and welfare. The water withdrawal will have a significant detrimental effect on the quantity or quality of the water resources. And this is new, it will cause irreparable damage to an aquifer, which is defined as the aquifer not yielding the same amount of water as it did. Those are the big ticket items. There are more in ORC 152129, and I'll share those links later. Moving on to our water withdrawal and consumptive use permit, and this is for the Great Lakes basins of the Lake Erie watershed. This was required under Ohio Revised Code 1522 since 2009 as a result of the Great Lakes Compact. So generally, any new or increased withdrawal and consumptive use that averages over 1 million gallons per day over a 90-day period of inland surface water or groundwater would require a permit. The threshold is a bit higher for withdrawals directly out of Lake Erie, so that's bumped up to 2.5 MGD. Again, this must be permitted before any pumping occurs. Since 2009, we've only had 2 applications. Both have been permitted. One was relinquished. One that was relinquished never saw operations, so we didn't really get to see how that permit would play out. Both of them were for groundwater. So what is a water withdrawal and consumptive use? When the compact was established, it required each state to develop a baseline list of withdrawals and consumptive uses and capacities. So a new water withdrawal and consumptive use is one that did not exist of that compact date. An increased water withdrawal and consumptive use is one that was made by an existing facility that exceeds their capacity in the baseline list. So when they were grandfathered in under the compact. Many of the requirements are similar to the consumptive use permit that I mentioned before, until 2019 when we changed our law a bit. We bolstered our groundwater law in our code in 2019 via budget bill. Just to give you a little background of why the changes were made, we had so the citizens of Toledo were having some issue with their public water system. I think it was a pricing issue. I was not around for that time. They were concerned about a hike in the price. We had an entity come to us about 2 counties over that said, hey, I'm sitting on a high yielding aquifer. Why don't I start pumping 10 million gallons per day and sell it to the city of Toledo folks for a lot cheaper? At the time, we didn't have anything to protect the citizens or the aquifer from that happening. Luckily, that proposal fizzled out, but we realized that we needed to change our law pretty quickly to protect the citizens in the Lake Erie Basin. So we had a law in our Division of Mineral Resource Management that almost fit perfectly into what we needed to do for the Division of Water. So we took a very scientific approach to it now. The applicant must submit groundwater model and supporting data. The chief of the division now can deny, suspend, or revoke a permit. She can also order a decrease and have the permittee submit a revised groundwater model if their monitoring plan isn't showing the predictive ability of their original model. And also, there is a waterproof replacement provision for property owners claiming loss of an existing water supply. So a little bit more detail about those things. With the groundwater model, the chief must approve the applicant's model to establish a geographic area that could be impacted by the proposed withdrawal. So generally that is the 10-foot defined by the 10-foot contour line, which is a cone of depression predicted by the applicant's model. A permit now will not be approved if the proposed withdrawal or consumptive use will result in irreparable damage or destruction to an aquifer. It will not be approved if the withdrawal or consumptive use will result in significant loss of groundwater available to existing wells in the geographic area, with a caveat, and that the applicant had not identified a suitable replacement water supply. And I'll get into that in the next slide. Also, ODNR now may require the permittee to monitor groundwater levels inside and outside the geographic area, so the 10-foot contour line. And we may, the chief may suspend or revoke a permit if the continued withdrawal or consumptive use is going to damage or destruct the aquifer. A little bit more about the water replacements. So if you are a property owner within that geographic area and you experience a loss of groundwater, you can file a complaint to ODNR or the permittee. There is a rebuttable presumption that that permittee caused the loss within that geographic area. So the permittee is responsible for replacing the water supply to that property within 72 hours. And then they have 14 days to rebut that presumption. I know that's kind of confusing. I can clarify if anyone has questions. So if they are successful in their rebuttal, they can cease the water replacement supply. If they are not successful, then they have to set up a permanent water replacement supply on their dime for that property owner. If you're outside of that geographic area, you can also file a complaint, but there is no rebuttable presumption, so no water replacement required. We will take that complaint and we will take our hydrogeologist and investigate ourselves and document the results. We'll send the results to the complainant and the permittee, and they can either solve it amicably between themselves or they can take it to court. So that is a high level summary of our water permits in Ohio. We are in the same boat as Indiana right now. DeWine just asked, I've got a big map in my office right here. Governor DeWine announced a mega site in Fayette County. We've got Honda and LG coming to that and many more. So we're trying to feel it out as well to figure out the best way to protect surface water, groundwater, and the citizens of Ohio. And I think it's important that we rely on our other states. We knock on each other's doors frequently, so we're not recreating the wheel. If other states have some law or permit that works well for them, so I'm happy to answer any questions, or you can email me after.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Brad.
Sure.
I really appreciate that. It's always good to hear what's going on next door. I think what we're going to do based on time, and Representative Aylesworth is with us, if we want to just go ahead and shift to hear from him a little bit about why he proposed House Bill 1556, and then we will certainly have enough time for questions for both of you after that. Let me see here. Representative Aylesworth, I saw your face on there just a minute ago. But as you're gearing up here, I'd just like to introduce you guys to Representative Aylesworth. He's been very active participant in the Indiana Water Summits and bringing a lot of water legislation forward at the State House. So Representative Mike Aylesworth represents Indiana House District 11, which is in Lake and Porter counties. And he was first elected to the House in 2014, and he currently chairs the House Agricultural and Rural Development Committees and is a member of the Environmental Affairs and the Court and Criminal Codes Committees. Prior to his service, Representative Aylesworth was a business owner in Porter County and a member of the Porter County Commissioners and president of the Indiana Corn Growers Association and the Indiana Corn Marketing Council. That's quite a resume, Mike. We're always glad to have you here and appreciate your leadership, especially in this recent session, as well with the Watershed Development Commission bill and a number of other things. So really happy to have you here. Would love to hear a little bit about the bill that you proposed and why you did that.
And you'll need to unmute.
Yep. Is that better?
Good. Thank you.
Perfect.
Okay. Oh, very good. Well, you got to bear with me. At my age, I'm not as a frequent user of higher end technology. It takes me a little while to get things warmed up. So, but anyway, thank you for having me participate and visit about some of my background and usages of water and my feelings that we need to be really protective of Indiana's groundwater as a natural resource. And I don't know that we have the data necessary to make intelligent choices when it comes to large water withdrawals in the aquifers. And I think, I've been involved in water issues most of my whole life, starting in 1973. I live on the Kankakee River now currently. I can look out my front door and see the Kankakee River as it flows down toward Illinois. And since I farmed most of my life, was responsible for drainage issues, president of the county drainage board for 12 years. But as time moves on, you realize there's a much bigger picture than your little slice of the world. And now I'm in the legislature and have been now for the past 9 years. I wanted to take a more responsible look at our natural resources. And what really tipped the scale for me to drop that bill at the last minute was I remember in 1988 when we had like one of the worst droughts in northern Indiana that in my lifetime. The Prudential Farms, which is now a big dairy farm that has many thousands of cows, they installed many center pivots. And in fact, they withdrew so much water to try to save their crop, they dried up private water wells. And that was quite a to-do at the time. And as a result, in a couple of years, the legislature passed some legislation to give DNR more oversight in Jasper and Newton counties, which is where the dairy farms now are. Prudential has since sold that property. So thinking about that, and I just found out about this project with about 10 days to go before bill filing composition deadline, I should say. So I scrambled around, and there you go. Thank you, Jill. I scrambled around and had to come up with something because I wanted to start the conversation. There's been no conversation in policy or the legislature by anybody about what the proposal is at Lebanon to move water from the Tippecanoe Wabash Basin. So I hastily just did a very broad bill that gives the DNR issue a permit proposing to do work that requires more than 10 million gallons of water per day, following the DNR conducting a feasibility study examining the watershed and replenishment. So was an effort to start a conversation, which, and I heard some of the previous discussion, we really need to deeply get involved with at the policy level, as well as the financial level in the state budget, to make sure that our Department of Natural Resources has enough funding to have the test wells at different levels so they can make some scientific conclusions. As I found out when I was on the public policy nationally with the Corn Growers Association, there was always a lot of scary tactics, GMOs or frankenfoods and all that. But I learned to depend on my concept of sound science. That's why I'm so happy that Purdue's deeply involved in this at many different levels of people, because they are also believers in sound science. But in order to have sound science, you have to have data. And to acquire the data, DNR needs more resources, and I'm sure the USGS also needs more resources so that we can do a complete study of the groundwater availability all over the state of Indiana. When I left my post in agriculture, Governor Daniels appointed me as the director of the Northern Regional Office of IDEM in South Bend, and I learned all about the aquifer with no overburden up there in the Elkhart area, and it poses its own problems of water contamination. But that's not really what we're talking about now. We're talking about deep water withdrawals, and will it have an effect on community water systems? How deep are their intakes, as well as there's a lot of small private wells on private houses or subdivisions. So that's what I thought was rolling around in my mind. I did not know it. I'm not an expert. I'm not a scientist, but I've mucked around in water a good share of my life. In fact, my first job, I always like to tell this, my first job that actually paid something, when I was 12 years old, my dad loaned me out to a fellow that was installing field tile. My job was to walk behind the tile machine, pull the clay tile off the bank and bed them with my feet, then pull dirt over them. They would cover them so they wouldn't move. And it was a very interesting job, and I learned about water firsthand when I was 12 years old. I got 10 cents a tile. I was making big money. Anyway, that's sort of my story, my background, and why the bill came up, why I decided that it was important that we do this to start the conversation. Indiana has not had any policy conversation at the legislative level, and I don't know too many legislators that are scientists and understand Indiana's water at the deep level of the aquifers that are in the legislature that could be somewhat could add to the discussion and could contribute some scientific evidence. So I guess with that, that's sort of my background and why I did this, and to start the conversation, and not only for the LEAP project in Lebanon, but for many other aquifers in the state as we become much more sophisticated and use economic development as a tool and invite industries in. They're going to need water also. And once we have the water and they use the water, then if somebody withdraws 100 million gallons a day, they're going to have to discharge the water. Should we have a policy that makes the water go back into the area where the aquifer is, or can it be discharged into another aquifer? In other words, the water came to Lebanon, does it have to be pumped back upstream to the Wabash? So those are interesting questions that there are no easy answers for, but so let's start the discussion.
Yes, those are interesting questions. And I appreciate you recognizing that the speakers before you are short on data to answer them. Yes. Representative Aylesworth, your bill had suggested a feasibility study, which, would require having some of that information. Do you have any strategies for how we might fund something like that, or how to get such a aggressive and important initiative off the ground? And then I might go ahead.
I'm sort of at a loss because I talked to the chair of the Natural Resources Commission, and he didn't give me a hearing on the bill. So it died in the embryo stage. It was an idea that didn't go very far. But I've been working on that Water Development Commission bill for 4 or 5 years.
Right.
I'm right almost at the finish line on that in the Senate. So they should be adopted on Monday. So legislation like this that's so comprehensive and complex isn't something that just falls out of a basket and gets adopted. It's got to go through a lot of complicated processes, well, not only with the policymakers, but with the decision makers that are in the professional area in DNR or in item, anybody that deals with water. And Indiana has a very convoluted water chart. Have you seen that water chart that was put together several years ago with arrows going all over the place? And
All over the place. Yeah.
yeah. So it's going to take some time for this, but the important part of it, I got the bill filed before the filing deadline to start the conversation. So I'm very happy with that.
Great. So does that mean that we could expect you to offer it again next year, or have some conversations with us in advance of that to see what kind of ideas we could come up with?
Yes,
Okay.
good Lord willing, at my age that I will be back next year, the legislation I intend to, my health is good. I just turned 80 years old 2 weeks ago.
Well, congratulations on that. Congratulations.
Well, I tell people that you got to pick your parents wisely. Good genes.
Right. Let me know how you sort that out.
Yeah. So
I thought we might.
I intend to. Yes.
I thought we might go back to Brad for just a minute because you're a little bit ahead of us on this permit process, as Representative Aylesworth introduced. Did it take you guys a long time to kind of get the political support you needed for a permitting process? And did you prioritize the study of the resources themselves prior to that, or do you put that onus on the permittee who's requesting the permit?
No, I have to plead ignorance here. I'm sorry. I've only been a manager for a very short time. All of that was done prior to me assuming this position. From what I understand, the new groundwater legislation in 2019 moved pretty quickly because we had support of our state representative Hoops, and he helped get that into the budget bill pretty quickly. And I know we had a huge team working on it. We had our Division of Geological Survey, our hydrogeologists, some folks from wildlife, and we assembled a team pretty quick and got it pushed through pretty quick. But that's all that detail I know about it, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that much information. We're always trying to figure out where to start and avoid the pitfalls. Okay, I'm gonna look through some questions here in the Q&A to see if we have any proposed ones there. But I did want to ask you, Brad, if this sits in like a bigger conversation about water, because we're trying to do that in the state as we do regional studies, push for regional planning, host things like the Water Summit. Is this part of the Ohio or the H2O Ohio initiative in any way, or is this effort to manage water this way not part of that in any direct way?
H2 Ohio is kind of a funky program here at DNR. It kind of floats around. They are not involved with this in any way. There might be some future partnerships with collecting information, because I know they just started something called the Rivers Initiative, which should be gauging more rivers around Ohio. So there might be some collaboration with data sets there, but as of now, we are completely separate.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. So Representative Aylesworth, do you think when you look at introducing a permit program, we tend to have some often objectives, or people object to more regulation in the state. Do you think we start with the evaluation of the resources, or do we start with the regulation of the resource?
I think we need to collect the data and have a good solid data. Like I said, sound science is very important. Then you can talk to policymakers with the sound science in hand to have them come to their own logical conclusion, because most senior policymakers rely on good data. To go off without the good data is a little bit like flying in a glider. It goes so far so good, and then sometimes it doesn't, So I think we ought to do that first. And that's some resources.
Some resources toward our agencies. Yeah, certainly get support from groups like ours for that. One other question I had as I was looking at 1556 for you that might be of interest to the group is it focused on groundwater withdrawals. And Brad, maybe this goes for you as well. Do you see the surface water withdrawals sort of in the same vein when you're thinking about, either having these feasibility studies done before such a use would happen, or do either of you want to weigh in as to whether or not the priority is groundwater at the moment, or surface water, or both?
Go ahead, Brad.
At the time in 2019, the groundwater was obviously the priority. We are wanting to catch up our surface water laws with our groundwater laws and make them come from a more scientific approach instead of just gauging health, safety, and welfare of Ohio citizens. So hopefully in the future we can catch up our surface water law. But, I'm not sure.
Yeah. I have a similar feeling. It'll be groundwater would be first, and then tag along is surface water.
We really just wanted to take a scientific approach, and we are lacking that a bit on our surface water.
So I have one last question, and then I want to give all of our speakers a chance to offer some last comments. But Brad, you had mentioned the Toledo water example that, and often in policy, it takes a good crisis to get the conversation going, right? Was it that event for you guys, or were there other things going on in the state that prompted this? Because it seems like to get political support, it might not need to be a one-off. And I guess then conversely, I would ask Representative Aylesworth, is the conversation with the Leap Lebanon project, is that what has sparked this for you, or is this just a slow burn over time as we have been had the luxury of using our water resources without thinking about all of these topics? So Brad first, was that the crisis? And Representative Aylesworth, where are we on that scale?
Yes, that was the specific event that sparked the 2019 budget bill. As I mentioned, in the last 30 years, it's been the last 5 years where we've seen an uptick in applications. We didn't see any for 25 years. So this new boom in industry is going to really be something that we need to think about and start making some plans for.
Yeah, I certainly take a number of calls from our communities about that, who are entertaining economic development initiatives from people that are leaving the Western states looking for water supplies for their businesses. So I think, it's going to continue to be a conversation. Representative Aylesworth, was it this project in particular, or because of all your other experiences, is this sort of thing, do you just see it becoming a more frequent conversation topic?
It was always sort of an orphan child in the background, lurking in the background, but I had no reason to feel that it was extremely important that it come forward until the LEAP project popped up. And my longevity in life, I vividly remember that drought that killed all the trees we see between the northbound and southbound lanes up by Fair Oaks Farms and the dairies. They died, and the farm or the homes in Fair Oaks lost their water. And so when I do this project and people want to withdraw a lot of water, boom, where's the sound science here to tell us what's available and not available? So that's why it popped up. It was my memory of that event.
Well, I appreciate that. It's funny, when we started pulling this effort together, it occurred to me that it's not well known to everybody how the system works, that these water withdrawals and the registration at DNR, but that it's not permitted, and we see use inside our subbasins inside the White all the time, taking out in one subbasin and returning to another. And so I think that what sparked this conversation was just a change of scale. So I wonder, as we go forward, is it that there's now a conversation or concern or competition between regions versus, the fact that we do that locally inside a basin quite frequently? So I think you're right. Sound science seems to be a great place to start from. With that, I'm trying to also watch chat here as well and encourage our speakers to answer any questions they can. But I wanted to give our panelists the chance to kind of come back around before we adjourn for the day and share any last thoughts that you guys might have. So I thought I might go in the reverse order since I already have you, Representative Aylesworth, on the hook here. Any last thoughts you have about these water use issues, transfers, policy, future concerns that you'd like to share with the group?
You're asking?
Yes, if you just have any, you don't have to respond, but if you have any sort of closing thoughts or big picture thoughts for us.
Big picture thoughts is the The issue has now come up and made a little bit more public and risen to the surface. We need to pursue this now in the future with the help of the panelists I see right there. We do need more data, and we need to collect stuff that we can make a good sound scientific judgment as to whether this is harmful to the environment, whether extremely high draws can lead to water degradation issues, all kinds of things like that. We're not clear on, because we've never, in the course of human events and nature, we haven't had the ability nor the reason to dive into this. So it'll be a complex issue, and I hope it keeps moving forward.
I appreciate that sentiment. There's a question about whether it's supported by the budget bill, so I'll let you, we can stew on that one in a little bit here. Brad, any thoughts from you as you look at what we're dealing with over here from your perspective?
I just want to stress that, it's important to rely on our sister states. A lot of us are going through the same issues right now. A lot of us are seeing this boom in industrial water use. We're talking to Pennsylvania and West Virginia right now, and they're coming up with some great ideas for us. So just, why reinvent the wheel if others I have some permitting program or some great ideas for Indiana to use, and I'm happy to help. And my email will be on whatever Jane sends out, so feel free to send me any questions you may have. And thank you for having me.
Yes, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate the camaraderie. I'm going to go over to Keith and see if, Keith, you have any last thoughts for us today as we kind of close up here?
I mean, sorry, I've been dealing with all of these questions. They're great questions.
They are, aren't they? I know.
And I can't type fast enough to respond to them all. But I just like to reiterate, right? Indiana is blessed with water. We just, right, what the real conversation is how do we want to best use it and manage it to support all the things that we in the state want. And I'll close it there.
Yeah, that's certainly true. When I showed you guys that map at the beginning, I do that when I go do talks, because it's a slice of life, right? It shows you that even to turn the power on in your house, we need water, and to go to your job. And so these users aren't just somebody behind a curtain, they're all of us. So appreciate those comments, Keith. Ginger, you want to offer any insights or last thoughts here?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I think twofold. I appreciate Representative Aylesworth's sentiment on sound science and with acceptable methods and non-biased, neutral scientists leading that charge. So I think that's very important. So thank you very much for those comments. And then I'd also like to bring up the idea of a one water concept, and the idea that we should be managing water resources of every different level that has to do with water, with a community conversation as to what our goals and needs are behind water, and look at it as a holistic approach to managing that resource. So I'd like to bring the One Water Indiana conversation into this and move that needle forward as well.
Yeah, certainly support that. Those are both regional and statewide conversations we hope to keep having. Thank you for that. Okay, I think that takes me to Mark, maybe. Mark, thoughts for today? You busy answering questions as well?
I can't type that fast. So
I know.
Yeah, I think it's been reiterated over and over in this discussion, certainly the importance of monitoring data. And, we saw the USGS monitoring network impacted back in the early 2000s, 2003, where we, got rid of about 2/3 of the data that we had through those wells. And again, the foresight of the legislature to bump that back up with a volunteer monitoring network, that's really helped. In fact, a lot of those wells that were previously monitored or were re-equipped. And so, we went from like 92 groundwater monitoring wells to 35, and then now we're back up to that 90 or so with the volunteer network. And I think particularly in the work that we do here with the water rights law, the water use program, seeing the impacts and being able to evaluate the impacts to the groundwater resource in particular with that data is extremely important.
Hey, Mark, let me just weigh in that because that's actually a topic we focused on one year at the summit. Those wells that were taken off and then some put back on through volunteer, that number was still wildly low from, say, what Michigan does or that sort of thing. Do we, if Representative Aylesworth or other either leaders or funding sources are we prepared to know what we need? Do we have a good gap analysis, a way to say, here's our wish list, Representative Aylesworth, get us these wells back or get us this these many gauges put in? Does that exist anywhere?
Well, I think there is an effort to do that. There's a group that's meeting, looking at the groundwater monitoring program or the water monitoring program here in the state currently, and looking at criteria for determining sites. And, a lot of it's pretty much a no-brainer. You want to put it in areas where you maybe got some active pumping or significant, aquifer systems. But yeah, that is something that's being done to evaluate the current network and to look at expanding it. Yes.
Well, we will hope to use this forum to lift that effort further for sure. Ryan, I know you had a few things you wanted to share, and welcome back.
Thank you, Jill. And, most everybody today is touched on what I was going to touch on, which is the importance of not only groundwater and surface water data, but really data from the entire hydrologic cycle. So those water balance stations that Ginger referred to, that's very important. But I think maybe a twist on this is what we can consider maybe as an action item for the group, which is, while we all agree, I think the message really needs to be clear and consistent among the various scientists, stakeholders, when communicating the needs and benefits of not only maintaining the network, as Keith said, but investing in Indiana's water networks in the future. So perhaps refining a unified message detailing the importance of need for these networks and data should be considered a follow-up action item for today. And I promise Jill didn't pay me to say this, but that theme and a few other themes have been included in the Indiana Water Summit's white paper that was developed in 2022. And so not only does the need for data and science appear as a theme, but also this whole topic about regional planning. We really haven't touched much on water quality issues today. That's also part of this more broad discussion. And so if you haven't attended the Indiana Water Summit, I urge you to do that, because Jill and her team really do a good job in trying to get input like we've done today from stakeholders prior to the meeting, and then be able to answer some of those questions at the meeting. So again, just wanted to say that is a terrific forum that's ongoing. It's really been useful, I think, for a lot of people, and you get a very broad audience with not only the folks like us, the scientists and others, the policymakers, but legislators, and then importantly, the water use community and the public. So I'd like to just end there. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I didn't pay Ryan to say that, but I did want to bring up that, as you guys know, we did have some other speakers hoping to talk about the LEAP Lebanon project in more detail, and we just don't have the data for that right now. But we have invited them to the summit and expect them to be there to help share, which will hopefully have that project will have advanced its study approach and actually put some wells in the ground at that point. So we look forward to continuing that conversation with more specifics at the Water Summit, which is what we will do on our regional day. So if you haven't had enough today, come back, we'll get you some more. With that, we have just a few minutes left, and I did want to give Jane a chance to weigh in. She was the one that initiated a lot of interest in hosting this conversation. So Jane, would you like to share some thoughts with us?
Yeah, thanks, Jill, and thanks to everyone. When we started thinking what we could do that would be useful, we realized right away that we didn't have enough data to really analyze this LEAP Lebanon project. But what it does do is provide an opportunity to talk about two gaps that you have already mentioned. One is obviously the data gap, the investment that the state is making compared with what we need is not there. And then the other gap is that we have no policy that would address that. And I'm so appreciative of Representative Aylesworth introducing a bill and coming on and speaking about it. That's been really interesting. So Purdue's Institute for a Sustainable Future, and then I am time in Purdue Extension, and so I have a particular commitment to bringing up these conversations and sharing science as we can to advance the conversation. We're really pleased to be able to do this and perhaps do more. So I put a link to a short survey where we welcome any feedback. You'll see it in the chat. I hope that's shown to all of you. We'll also email it out, but this is a good time to do it. Just a few quick questions, including one I always like what was surprising, because hopefully we've learned something that you didn't expect, along with many things that you probably did. So again, Jill is right that this is not new, but it is a new scale. And certainly it's been a great opportunity to have some conversations that should benefit us in the future. Thanks. And back to Jill.
Okay, thank you, Jane. I was just scrolling the Q&A. Folks were asking if the Q&A questions would be available afterwards. We will do our best to do that. And I am taking note of some of the topics that maybe we didn't have the right people on to answer, but might be good future topics for us. So we will, please trust, we'll do our best to get you answers or to bring those topics back up in another discussion forum when we can get the right people there. So with that, our water community is stronger for doing stuff like this. Thank you guys for giving up your Friday afternoon to put a couple hundred people into a conversation about this, I think is a giant step forward. So thanks to Purdue as well and our speakers. And I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend, and we will see you at the next event.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jill. Good job, everybody.
Thanks, Jill and Jane.
You're welcome. Happy to do it.
Thank you. I'm not sure technically how to save those questions and answers, but I did I was able to copy and paste them.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great, Lynn.